Well, it's Father's Day, and when the modern tradition began at the beginning of the last century, men unarguably had more rights than women. But is that still the case today? This week, the Women's and Equality Committee said the government had rejected many of its recommendations aimed at giving working dads more opportunities to spend time with their families. But what about the rights of men in general? With continuing stories about the gender pay gap and in the age of movements like Me Too, is the pendulum beginning to swing too far in favour of women? Or are men whinging too much? Well, joining me to give their view on that, our broadcaster and journalist Nick Ferrari. You probably heard him laughing a bit then at that. We'll get to you in a moment. Co-founder of Men and Boys Coalition, Ali Fogg. And still with us are Laurie Penny, Afua Hirsch and Ella Whelan. Well, let's get straight to you, Nick, then. In this age of gender pay gaps and Me Too, is there a need for a men's movement?
It's richly ironic, isn't it, that it was the Women and Equalities Committee that actually pointed out that these recommendations hadn't been taken out, so there's not even a men's committee. No, I was laughing because undoubtedly the men have had the rub of the green, or whatever you want to say. But when you come to something like this, it probably pays to just take a step back and look at some numbers. And research shows that in many areas, the area that is failing, the group that is failing most in Britain's schools are boys, and in many instances white boys as well, and they then obviously have to come through and they have to get into the workplace. So is there something that needs to perhaps help them through? Are they then going to have problems in the work arena and to do with pay? Yes, there is. And just lastly, and again, you look at this, there's also the aspects of emotional health, where, again, it would appear young males seem to have a tougher time of it. So has the pendulum swung in some areas? Possibly, yes, but it would be ridiculous, and I can see Afua glaring at me, it would be ridiculous to suggest in all.
I mean, we'll get onto the mental health side of things in a moment, but boys are having it tough, men are having it tough, and feminism is the problem.
So I think this is a complete misunderstanding of feminism. Feminism is not a zero-sum game trying to take away from men to give to women. It's saying that living in a society where there's structural inequality is bad for all of us. It's bad for women because we're not allowed to realise our potential, we're not allowed to self-define and have freedom to live our lives and define our own roles, but it also is giving boys these very toxic messages linked to some of the problems. Nick's saying that they should inhabit this very damaging version of masculinity that's actually very bad for boys and men as well. So these things are all part and parcel of the same thing. You know, a lot of the mental health suicide problems that young men are experiencing are linked to the same patriarchal norms that affect women. And that's why feminism and having healthy families where people can share parenting are all part of the same cause.
Ali, is feminism a problem for men's rights?
I'm not comfortable with the term men's rights, particularly if you kind of use an uppercase MR, which is a particular political ideology. But if we're talking about men's issues and the very real issues, particularly around education and mental health and so on and so forth, I think we're actually at a very interesting time for men's issues, and certainly in this country. In the last few years, we've seen an opening up of the discussion around men's health, particularly with movements like Movember, Men United on prostate cancer. We've seen similar things with men's mental health, so charities like CAM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, doing fantastic work specifying men's mental health as a gender-inclusive issue. So we're not just talking about women have gender issues and men are the default. Actually, men and women both have gender-specific issues to deal with. And, you know, we've got a long way to go in understanding that and moving things forward.
But the idea that if we focus too much on women and Me Too and looking out for women, we're not looking out for men. Is that an issue for you?
I fundamentally reject that, that premise. When we talk about Me Too, it seems to me that as men, we have a choice of where we identify, how we want to express our masculinity, the good qualities about masculinity, strength, courage, forbearance, stoicism, all these things. Do we want to use that to stand up shoulder to shoulder with the women and men who stood up and said, look, this has happened to me and I want to make damn sure this doesn't happen to anyone else? Yeah. Or do we want to snivel in the corner with the abusers and the rapists and the molesters? Because that's not any kind of masculinity that I want to associate with.
Ella, I mean, that's just think about it. We all want equality, so we all want the same thing. Shouldn't we all be working together?
Well, this is it. I think that, I mean, I know you don't like the term men's rights, but let's go with it for now, because there is this kind of feeling among some men that there should be a movement for men and men's issues. And I think what it takes takes is all the worst parts, worst characteristics of feminism. So it takes the victim narrative, it takes the political argument that your gender is specific to your entire feeling and your entire experience of the world, and it says, you know, it kind of is this kind of whinging thing of we have our issues and we need our needs met, and women have had too good a time of it. And then
clearly there are lots of issues.
Well, feminists, on the other hand, I'm afraid, contemporary feminists, is often their arguments are coloured by this idea that it's sort of men are the problem, the patriarchy, this... I don't know how to express what the patriarchy means. It's kind of floating spectre in the corner. The gender pay gap, which is a myth. If you want to talk about something in relation to childcare, which obviously affects families and both genders, that can be easily solved by good quality state-provided free access childcare. Not a kind of focus on men's rights, not a focus on feminism, but just some practical solutions to this problem.
Well, that's ironic because good quality state-provided childcare has always been a key and core demand of the feminist movement going back 200 years. I mean, even a cursory look at feminist history would show you that, and that's still a demand today. I absolutely agree. I think providing childcare as well as trying to sort out who will kind of find the time in between these crushing demands on work to look after kids as kids deserve to be looked after. You know, we have one of the problems is that we're trying to fit family life into a culture that demands that everyone be constantly available for paid work, and it just doesn't work. But this is a stereotype about feminism. Feminism is not about attacking men. It's about, as Afua said, providing more rights and more freedom for everyone.
We heard earlier about government proposals for fathers' rights to be more with their children and their families being rejected. Let's get another insight into this from Cherry.
OK, so joining me now is the MP Gavin Shuker, who is a member of the Women and Equalities Committee, who published the report into Fathers in the Workplace. Hi there. So,
hello.
Why do you think that fathers need more help in the workplace?
Well, look, dads get a pretty good deal at the moment in that they get paid more on average, and also do less childcare, less housework around the home on average. But actually, the pattern of how you raise a child, splitting between different parents, affects children growing up through their whole lives. And so we've made some really practical recommendations that make it easier for men to be present around their kids. Really simple stuff like when you are going to an antenatal appointment, making sure people pick those up and that they're paid at the time. Making sure there's a block of leave that you use or you lose. And this doesn't just affect men, it affects all families and it affects kids as well in a positive way.
Well, actually, it sounds like you're saying if men have more rights in the workplace, and actually that benefits women as well.
Yeah, it's not necessarily more rights, it's probably more rights than they have today. It's about equal rights and making sure that we start to view the role of child raising as something that is shared between parents when they are going through that process. You know, a lot of this is pocketbook issues. If on the one hand you take off time as a man and get paid less, but a woman takes off time and gets paid more, it's probably likely that's the model you're going to adopt. By equalising this much more and having a block that can't be lost, we're going to set a pattern of child rearing that hopefully carries on through right the way through a child's life and ends up in better outcomes for men, women and for kids as well.
So how do you feel about the government's rejection of the proposal?
Yeah, I think it's really short-sighted, actually. You know, one of their stated government aims is to tackle the gender pay gap, and we know that's kind of baked in when women particularly take time off to have kids. By equalising these things out, we could end up with a better outcome for all parents. But also, it doesn't reflect the fact that society is changing. As a man, increasingly, we're starting to have different expectations around wanting to be present for our kids. And so it's a really simple win-win for society. It's a shame that the government has rejected many of these proposals.
All right, Gavin, thank you so much. Sean, back to you.
Cherry, yeah, interesting. Let's put that to Nick. I mean,
well, you know, I mean, this isn't something that could be mandated, is it, really, when you think about it? I cannot think of anything that would have horrified my ex-wife more than the fact that I'd been home when the children first arrived.
Maybe that's why she's your ex-wife.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there for the delivery. I drove them home safely. I think I took the afternoon off. bang,
But that's
straight
a
into work
really
to make the money to pay for everything.
Nick, that's an outdated view. That's
No,
the problem, isn't it?
You can't mandate it. So if people want to do it my
talking
way,
about
fantastic.
mandating
No, you need to make it easier for men who would
But
like
men
to
who
be
want
around.
to do it, yeah, absolutely,
But
they
that's
shouldn't
the
be
issue with
discriminated.
equal pay. Equal pay is both a symptom and a cause, because women are getting paid less partly because they're taking time out to be the main carers for children, but also families don't have the option of choosing who is going to be at home, because if
No, I
men
just
are
listened to what the
paid
MP
more
said,
than
that's
women,
is it the
but if
MP?
men are consistently earning more than women, you don't have the choice to say that the man is going to stay at home, because as a family you have
Can't
to let the
afford it.
higher
No,
earner work, and
no.
that's why it's just repeating the cycle of generation after generation not having genuine choice about how to share parenting.
But it can't be mandated. That's all.
And Ali, we're reinforcing the gender pay gap. If we're not giving men the option to be there at home.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that when something like taking parental leave, you've got the individual choices and preferences, and you'll have people like Nick who don't particularly want to stay at home and with their child.
And all that kind of thing.
You've also got a social issue, a society, what the culture thinks. So if you're a man, it may be that your employer has perfectly progressive and legal policies for parental leave, but you know that all your workmates will judge you much more harshly as a man if you take that leave than if a woman did.
The point
but there's also then the policy framework and the actual rules that are laid down by government and by employers. And unless you get all three of those in place, and all three of them support the other, so if you get the policy framework correct, that makes it easier for the culture and the society to change, and that then makes it easier for individuals to make a better, I would argue, choice than Nick has made.
Afua?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There is individual choice. I mean, Nick's a dinosaur, you know, bless you, Nick. And he's actually, you've raised your children.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
He's been a very hands-on dad, so don't let the
Well, you didn't say he raised
bravado-
children. It sounded like
After the
you
divorce,
missed it.
unbelievably, they stayed with me after the divorce. I mean, what did they get wrong there?
So your wife raised your children.
No, they stayed with me.
And then the children stay with you? Oh,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, after the divorce, they stayed
Don't
with
let
me.
the bravado fool you. He's actually...
Change a few
Don't
numbers
give it
in
away.
your town. Yeah.
But it's not. This isn't rocket science. I mean, to bring it back to a more serious issue, women are still in society seen as the chief nose wipers, the ones who are going to keep the appointments, the ones who are going to do the main lion's share of the child rearing. But that's not because we still live in a sexist society where men are like, back to the kitchen, you, and don't leave the house. It's because we have wages are low, and actually if you're a kind of a working class family, you do have to make some difficult decisions about who's going to go back to work, or both of you are going to go back to work, whether you can juggle the cost of childcare. This shouldn't be seen as an identity politics issue of men's rights versus feminism, because that just doesn't get to what the reality of most people
this is a women's rights issue.
Nick, how close are we to equality?
Closer than we were, but not close enough, is what I would probably say. We have come a heck of a long way from when my dad was a dad and when I was a dad, but there's still a lot of work to do, and both sides have to be balanced, men and women.
OK, a really interesting debate. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.